The recycling system groaned its familiar complaint, and Orion Vale barely looked up from the tangle of wires in his hands. 8 years on the Meridian station had taught him every sound the dying facility could make. This particular wheeze meant the carbon scrubbers needed attention again, but that could wait. Everything could wait when you were the only living soul within 30 million kilometers. He twisted 2 connectors together, watching the diagnostic panel flicker to life. The station had been scheduled for decommission 9 years ago, but budget cuts left it floating in the void, forgotten by everyone except the occasional salvage crew and one stubborn engineer who preferred ghosts of machinery to the company of living beings. The proximity alarm shattered his concentration. Orion's hands froze. In 8 years, he'd heard that sound perhaps a dozen times, always merchant vessels limping past, occasionally requesting emergency supplies. He pulled up the sensor display, expecting the usual freight hauler or survey ship. The signature made his breath catch. Valerian Diplomatic Transport, registry indicating royal clearance. His wrench clattered to the deck. There was only one person who might come looking for him. Only one person who knew he'd retreated to this particular corner of nowhere. But that was impossible. 8 years of silence meant she'd moved on, forgotten the human who'd been a brief curiosity in her otherwise predetermined life. Orion forced himself to breathe. It could be coincidence. Diplomatic vessels traveled everywhere. There was no reason to assume the cum crackled. Meridian Station. This is Transport Vessel Crystal Wind requesting docking clearance. The voice was professional, neutral, but underneath it ran those melodic harmonics unique to Valerian speech. His finger hovered over the response button. He could deny them, claim the docking clamps were inoperative. The station was barely functional anyway. It wouldn't be a complete lie. Meridian Station, we have traveled far to reach you. Please respond. That voice. Not the pilot, but someone else, speaking from deeper within the ship. A voice that had haunted his dreams for 8 years. Though it sounded different now. Stronger. More certain. Orion engaged the docking sequence with trembling hands. 20 minutes later, he stood in the main bay, watching the sleek Valerian craft settle onto the ancient clamps. The vessel was smaller than he'd expected for a diplomatic transport, its hull bearing royal insignia, but also signs of hard travel. Not the pristine ship of a pampered royal, but something that had seen real use. The airlock cycled. 2 guards emerged first, their ceremonial armor modified with practical additions. Actual weapons rather than decorative ones. They scanned the bay with professional efficiency before stepping aside. Then she appeared. Thessaly stood in the airlock, and Orion felt 8 years of carefully constructed emotional distance evaporate. She wore traveling clothes rather than formal robes, deep blue fabric that complemented her pale skin. Her hair, that distinctive silver white of her bloodline, was pulled back in a practical braid rather than the elaborate styles he remembered from their brief time together. But her eyes, those crystalline blue eyes, were exactly as he remembered. Perhaps clearer, more focused, but still capable of seeing through every defense he'd ever built. She descended the ramp with that distinctive gait, the result of the crystalline bone disease that had made her family's embarrassment. Her left leg moved with careful precision, the slight drag he remembered. But she didn't hide it now, didn't try to minimize her difference. She walked with the confidence of someone who'd stopped apologizing for existing. "Hello, Orion," she said, and her voice wrapped around his name like a familiar embrace. He stood frozen. A dozen responses fighting for dominance. "Princess, Your Highness. Why are you here? I never thought I'd see you again. What took you so long?" "Thessaly," he managed, and the informal address felt both transgressive and necessary. Her lips curved into a slight smile. "You remember my name. I wondered if you might have forgotten." "I remember everything," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Something flickered in her expression. Hope, perhaps, or vindication. She gestured to her guards, who retreated to the ship with practiced discipline, leaving them alone in the cavernous bay. 8 years, Orion said, finding his voice. No messages, no communication. I thought that I'd forgotten. She moved closer, her uneven steps echoing in the empty space. That the 7 days we spent together meant nothing? You're a princess. He gestured helplessly at the decrepit station around them. You're the only person who ever chose me, Thessaly said quietly. Not my title, not my bloodline, not what I could offer politically. Just me. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The Interspecies Harmony Initiative selection room, where humans and aliens had circled each other like animals at a market. He'd been 23, fresh from his engineering certification, curious about alien cultures, and naive enough to think 7 days could be meaningful. He remembered her sitting alone in the corner, hood pulled low, trying to disappear. The other humans had gravitated toward the physically impressive aliens, the ones who could enhance their social standing. Nobody approached the small figure who radiated shame. The program coordinator had warned him. That one's damaged goods. Royal family trying to offload their embarrassment. Save yourself the trouble. But Orion had seen her glance up briefly, and in that moment her eyes had held such resignation, such expectation of rejection, that something in him had rebelled against the cruelty of it. I'll pair with her, he'd said, the shock in her eyes when he'd approached. When he'd asked rather than demanded, when he'd treated her like a person rather than a problem, that shock had transformed into something else over their 7 days together. Do you remember? Thessaly asked now, pulling him from the memory. The habitat they assigned us? Half earth forest, half Valerian crystal garden, Orion said. The singing crystals that weren't quite right because they were artificial. And you built that resonator, she continued, stepping closer, trying to recreate the sound of home for me. It was crude, he protested. It was the first time anyone had listened to what I loved and tried to give it back to me. Her voice softened. The first of many kindnesses. Orion remembered those 7 days with painful clarity. The awkward first meetings, her gradually emerging from her shell of shame, teaching him about Valerian culture while he shared human engineering principles. The evening she'd cried in her sleep, and he'd held her hand until dawn. The 6th night, when everything had changed. Why now? He asked, his voice rough. Why come looking for me after 8 years? Thessaly met his gaze steadily. Because everything has changed on Velarios. Because I need you. And because... She hesitated, vulnerability breaking through her composure. Because I never stopped thinking about the human who touched my crystalline bones without flinching, who looked at my uneven walk and saw character instead of defect. Thessaly, my father is dead, she said bluntly. The royal family tore itself apart in civil war. The survivors looked for someone to rebuild around, and somehow they chose the broken princes they'd hidden away. Orion stared at her. Your queen? Not yet. The old powers resist. They want a puppet they can control. Her chin lifted. I won't be controlled again, but I also won't become the monster they were. I need someone who remembers who I was before crowns and politics. Someone who saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself. The words hung between them, weighted with 8 years of silence and 7 days of connection that had never truly faded. I don't belong in your world, Orion said. But the protest sounded weak even to his own ears. You belong where I am, Thessaly said simply. You always have. I was just too afraid to claim you then. She extended her hand, palm up, an offering and a question. But I'm not afraid anymore. Orion looked at her hand, at the slight tremor that betrayed her nervousness, despite her brave words. 8 years ago, he'd run from the intensity of what he'd felt after just 7 days. He'd told himself it was impossible to love someone so quickly, that what they'd shared was just a beautiful illusion created by artificial circumstances. But standing here now, looking at the woman who'd crossed light years to find him, he wondered if he'd been lying to himself all along. Orion didn't take her hand. Not yet. Instead, he turned away, staring at the scuffed metal walls of the docking bay. "You should see where I've been living before you make grand pronouncements about where I belong." Thessaly lowered her hand, but didn't retreat. "Show me." He led her through the station's corridors, acutely aware of how decrepit everything had become. Exposed wiring hung from ceiling panels. Environmental displays flickered erratically. The air recyclers produced a constant background hum that spoke of imminent failure. This was what 8 years of self-imposed exile looked like. His quarters were worse. A narrow room with a sleeping alcove. A small workspace buried under engineering manuals and salvaged components, and almost nothing personal. Nothing except a locked drawer in his desk that seemed to pulse with accusation. Thessaly's guard. Brixton, a tall Valerian male with the typical rich purple skin weighted outside, expression carefully neutral. Orion caught him studying the station's condition with barely concealed disdain. "This is home," Orion said, the words bitter. "Still think I belong in a palace?" Thessaly moved through the small space, trailing her fingers along the workbench. She picked up a half-finished circuit board, examined it with genuine interest. "You're maintaining this entire station alone?" "There's not much left to maintain. Mostly I'm just delaying the inevitable." "Why here?" she asked, setting down the circuit board. "Of all the places in the galaxy, why hide yourself in a dying station?" "Because I needed somewhere that matched how I felt inside," he said, the honesty escaping before he could stop it, her crystalline eyes fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. "Because of me? Because of 7 days that I couldn't forget, no matter how hard I tried." He moved to the desk, his hand hovering over that locked drawer. "After they took you away, I requested the most remote posting available. Mars Station, then Jupiter's moons, then further out. Each transfer taking me further from Earth, from civilization, from anything that might remind me of you." "Orion, let me finish." He pulled out the key, unlocked the drawer with hands that trembled slightly. Inside lay a worn journal and a folder thick with technical drawings. He placed both on the desk between them. "I told myself it was just 7 days. That what we shared was some kind of artificial intimacy created by the program. That I'd get over it." Thessaly opened the journal, her fingers gentle on the aged pages. Orion watched her face as she read his entries from those 7 days. His clinical observations mixed with increasingly personal reflections. Day 1. Subject displays extreme social anxiety. Physical differences from typical Valerian morphology include translucent skin pigmentation and bone structure abnormality in left leg. More importantly, she has the saddest eyes I've ever seen. Day 3. She smiled today. Actually smiled. I think I'd cross stars to see that again. Day 5. Helped her into the lake. Her leg is worse than I thought. Sajur crystalline bone disease, probably congenital. Been sketching ideas for a mobility aid. Not sure why. Not sure she'd even want it. She turned to the final entry, written the day after their separation, and he saw her eyes glisten. Day 8. I don't know if 7 days is enough time to fall in love. But if this isn't love, then why does her absence feel like amputation? "You kept this," she whispered. "I kept everything." He opened the folder, spreading the technical drawings across the desk. 8 years of refinements to his original prosthetic design. Iterations incorporating Valerian crystalline technology, Earth bioengineering, materials he'd researched obsessively. "I couldn't build it because I didn't have access to you, to your specifications. But I couldn't stop designing it either. Thessaly stared at the drawings, her hand pressed to her mouth. The latest design was elegant, sophisticated, a crystalline framework that would support her weakened bone structure while allowing natural movement. Not a cure, but a partnership with her body rather than a replacement of it. 8 years, she said, her voice breaking. You spent 8 years perfecting this? I needed something to hold on to. Some way to feel like I was still connected to you, even if you'd moved on. He gathered the papers, unable to look at her. Pathetic, right? The sad human who couldn't let go of a princess who was never his to begin with. Orion, look at me. He forced himself to meet her gaze. Do you want to know what happened when I returned to Valarios? She asked. After our 7 days? He nodded, not trusting his voice. They locked me away immediately. Not the tower this time, but worse, a medical facility where they ran tests, trying to determine if I'd been contaminated by human contact. Her voice hardened. They were terrified I might be carrying a hybrid child. When the tests came back negative, my father actually seemed disappointed. A scandal would have given him an excuse to eliminate me entirely. Orion's hands clenched into fists. They sent me to a colony world called Vishen Minor, named ironically after my grandmother. A place where they exiled genetic mistakes, those of us who don't meet Valerian standards of perfection. She moved to the small window, gazing out at the stars. I thought I would die there. Not physically, but spiritually. I'd had 7 days of being seen as worthy, and then... I'm so sorry, Orion said. If I'd known, what would you have done? Declared war on a royal family? She turned back to him, and he saw the steel that had been forged in her during their years apart. No, what happened next was something neither of us could have predicted. She told him about the Shone Minor, how the exiles had built a community of the unwanted, how she'd arrived expecting isolation and found instead people who understood what it meant to be discarded. There was a woman there, Kasha, born with 6 fingers on each hand, considered monstrous by traditional standards. She became my closest friend. Thessaly's voice softened. She was the first person I told about you, about the human who'd chosen me, who touched my malformed bones without revulsion, who'd made love to me like I was precious. Orion remembered that night with painful clarity. The artificial starlight, her trembling beneath his hands, the wonder in her eyes when he'd called her beautiful and meant it. Kasha asked me what I was going to do with that gift, Thessaly continued, whether I would let it sustain me or destroy me. I chose to let it transform me. She straightened, and he saw the queen she was becoming. I started teaching the others that we weren't broken, we were different. That difference wasn't weakness. You built a resistance, Orion realized. Not intentionally. But when word spread across Valarios about the colony of defects who refused to be ashamed, people listened. When the royal family tore itself apart with corruption and civil war, when my father and brothers destroyed each other in their greed, the people remembered the princess who'd been cast aside. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the faint crystalline patterns in her skin that marked her condition. They came to Vishen Minor in ships and shuttles, thousands of them. They said they wanted a ruler who understood suffering, who wouldn't see them as resources to be exploited. They offered me the crown not despite my imperfection, but because of it. And you accepted, Orion said. Not immediately. I was terrified. What did I know about ruling? Her voice dropped. But then I thought about what you'd said to me, about kintsukuroi, the art of repairing broken things with gold, about how something broken and repaired is more beautiful for having survived. Thessaly. I accepted the crown because I wanted to build a Valarios where no one would be locked away for being different, where children with crystalline bone disease wouldn't be hidden as shameful secrets. Her eyes held his. But I also accepted because I wanted to become someone worthy of the man who'd seen worth in me first. The words hit him like a physical blow. You were always worthy. I know that now. You taught me that in 7 days. She reached out, her cool fingers touching his face in a gesture that catapulted him back 8 years. But I needed 8 years to believe it, to become strong enough to cross the void and claim what I should have claimed then. You could have anyone, Orion protested weakly. A proper Valerian consort, someone who understands your world. I don't want anyone else. I want the engineer who kept designing mobility aids for a princess he'd never see again. I want the man who wrote poetry about sad eyes in his technical journal. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. I want you, Orion Vale, if you'll have me. The locked drawer lay open between them. 8 years of longing made manifest in journal entries and technical drawings. Outside the tiny window, Velarios hung in the distance. A purple jewel waiting to swallow him into a world he didn't understand. But Thessaly stood before him. No longer the frightened girl who'd needed rescuing, but a woman who'd crossed stars to offer him a place in her impossible future. I don't know how to be a consort, he said. I don't know royal protocols or Valerian politics. I'm just an engineer who's better with machines than people. Good, Thessaly said. I have enough politicians. What I need is someone who will tell me the truth, who will remind me why I'm doing this when the weight becomes unbearable. Her hand remained on his face, steady despite the tremor he could feel. What I need is you. Orion closed his eyes, 8 years of carefully constructed walls crumbling. I'm afraid. So am I, she admitted. But I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward despite it. When he opened his eyes, she was smiling that rare, transformative smile he'd crossed his memory 1,000 times. Give me tonight, he said finally. Let me think about this without you standing here, making it impossible to be rational. Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. Tomorrow, then. My ship leaves at dawn. She moved toward the door, then paused. Orion? Thank you for keeping those designs. For not forgetting me. I couldn't forget you if I tried, he said honestly. Believe me, I tried. After she left, Orion stood alone in his quarters, surrounded by the evidence of his 8-year obsession. The journal lay open to that final entry, his younger self's confusion about love and time. He understood now. 7 days had been enough. More than enough. The question was whether he had the courage to admit it. Orion didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at his workbench, staring at the mobility aid designs spread before him like accusations. Outside his window, the crystal wind rested in the docking bay, its presence transforming the dying station into something that felt alive again at 0300 hours. He gave up on pretending to work and pulled up his old communications logs. Buried deep in the archives was a contact he hadn't used in 3 years. Naveen Reeves, his former roommate from the space engineering corps. The connection took several minutes to establish, routing through multiple relay stations. When Naveen's face finally appeared on the screen, he looked older, more successful than Orion remembered. Also deeply confused about why someone was calling him at what would be early morning on Mars Colony. Orion? Holy void, I thought you were dead. Or at least completely off-grid. Naveen rubbed his eyes. Please tell me this isn't a distress call, because if that station's finally giving out, I need advice. Orion interrupted. Naveen blinked. Advice? From me? You do remember that you're the genius engineer, and I'm the guy who barely passed thermodynamics? Not engineering advice. Life advice. Oh no. Naveen's expression shifted to concern. What happened? Are you sick? Is the isolation finally getting to you? Because I've been telling you for years that hiding in space is not a healthy coping mechanism. A Valerian princess showed up yesterday, asking me to return with her to help legitimize her claim to the throne. Orion said flatly. Silence. Then, I'm going to need you to repeat that. Orion told him everything. The Interspecies Harmony Initiative, the 7 days with Thessaly, 8 years of isolation and obsessive design work, her unexpected arrival, and her proposition. When he finished, Naveen was staring at him with an expression caught between awe and exasperation. Let me get this straight, Naveen said slowly. You spent 7 days with an alien princess 8 years ago, fell completely in love, never mentioned this to anyone, and have been hiding in progressively more remote locations while secretly designing her a prosthetic leg? When you say it like that, it sounds pathological. Because it is pathological. Naveen's voice rose. Orion, you disappeared from everyone's lives. Do you know how worried we were? And all this time you were pining for someone you spent a week with? It was more than that. I'm not finished. Naveen leaned closer to the camera. Now this woman, this queen, crosses the galaxy to find you, brings you undoubtedly romantic declarations and invitations to be part of her world, and you're actually considering saying no? I'm considering the practical realities. Screw practical realities. Naveen looked genuinely angry now. You've been practically dead for 8 years. You think I didn't notice? You think none of us noticed how you pulled away from everyone? How you took increasingly isolated posts? How you stopped being the guy who was excited about everything? Orion flinched. It wasn't that simple. It never is. But here's what I see. Someone who loved you enough to remember you for 8 years while building a revolution. Someone who, despite having an entire planet's worth of choices, came looking specifically for you. And you're sitting there cataloging reasons to run away again. I'm not running. Then what do you call what you've been doing? Naveen's voice softened. Look, I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you that you've been half alive since you came back from that program. If she's the reason you've been dying slowly out here, maybe she's also the reason you could start living again. After they disconnected, Orion sat in the darkness, Naveen's words echoing in his mind. Had he been dying? It had felt more like existing, like maintaining basic functions without truly living. He looked around his quarters with new eyes. No personal touches. No decorations. Nothing that spoke of hope or future. Only an endless present of maintenance and survival. The journal lay where Thessaly had left it, still open to that final entry. If this isn't love, then why does her absence feel like amputation? At 0530 hours, he made his way to the docking bay. The Crystal Wind was preparing for departure, its engines cycling through pre-flight checks. Brixton stood guard at the airlock, his expression neutral, but his stance suggesting he expected Orion to stay behind. I need to speak with her, Orion said. Brixton studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside without a word. He found Thessaly in the ship's small observation lounge, staring out at the stars. She'd changed into formal traveling robes, the blue fabric accented with silver thread that caught the light. She looked every inch a queen, preparing to return to her kingdom. She turned when he entered, and he saw resignation in her eyes. She'd already accepted his refusal. I've been thinking about what you said, Orion began. About needing someone who remembers who you were before crowns and politics. You don't have to explain, Thessaly said quietly. I understand. What I'm asking is unreasonable. You have your life here. I don't have a life here, he interrupted. I have an existence. A very empty one that I've been pretending is enough. Hope flickered across her face. But I need to understand what you're really asking, he continued. You're not just inviting me to Velarios. You're asking me to enter a political situation I don't understand, to stand beside you while you navigate dangerous waters. There will be people who see me as a weakness to exploit, a foreign influence to be eliminated. Yes, Thessaly acknowledged. The old guard despises me already. A human consort will give them more ammunition. She moved closer. But I won't lie to you about the dangers. Regent Morvis leads the opposition. He was my father's chief advisor and expects to rule through me as a puppet. When he discovers I have my own will, and worse, that I've brought a human to court, he'll try to use me against you, Orion finished. He'll try, but he'll fail, because I'm not the frightened girl who could be controlled through shame anymore. Steel entered her voice. I've spent 8 years building alliances among the common people, the colonies, the defective ones that the old families discarded. Morvis has the traditional power structures, but I have something more dangerous hope. Orion studied her, seeing the tactician beneath the romantic. You've thought this through. I've thought about nothing else since they offered me the crown. She met his gaze steadily. I won't manipulate you, Orion. If you come with me, it will be dangerous. You'll be an outsider in a court that values bloodline above all else. You'll face prejudice, political attacks, possibly even physical danger. And if I don't come? Pain flashed across her face. Then I rule alone. I build the Velarios I envision, where difference is celebrated rather than punished. But I do it without the one person who taught me to see my own worth. She took a shaky breath. And every night, I'll wonder what might have been if I'd been braver 8 years ago. If I'd fought for you instead of accepting that I didn't deserve happiness. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Orion thought about his conversation with Naveen, about 8 years of slow death disguised as living. He thought about the journal entries where his younger self had recognized love, even while questioning it. He thought about designing mobility aids for someone he'd never see again, unable to let go despite distance and time. Tell me about the coronation, he said. Thessaly's eyes widened. The coronation? If I come with you, I should know what I'm walking into. Orion, tell me, he insisted. I need to understand all of it before I decide. She took a breath, visibly steadying herself. The coronation takes place in 3 months. Until then, I'm officially just a claimant to the throne, ruling with a provisional council. Morvis controls half that council. He's agreed to the coronation only because he believes he can control the outcome. How? There's a traditional challenge during the ceremony. Any noble house can question the heir's fitness to rule. It's usually symbolic, a formality. Her expression darkened. But Morvis will use it to question my legitimacy, my genetic imperfection, my time in exile, anything he can weaponize. And you need me there because I'm going to tell them the truth, Thessaly said simply. That I'm not perfect. That I bear scars and differences, and all the things they tried to hide. And that those things make me stronger, not weaker, because I understand suffering in a way they never will. She moved closer, her uneven steps deliberate rather than hidden. I'm going to tell them about 7 days with a human who saw worth where they saw shame, who taught me that being different isn't the same as being less. Her voice dropped. And I want you there, standing beside me, as proof that I'm not asking them to accept weakness. I'm asking them to recognize that their definition of strength has been wrong all along. Orion felt something shift inside him, the final wall crumbling. You want to use our story as a political statement. I want to use our story as truth, she corrected. But yes, it will be political. Everything a ruler does is political. The question is whether you can accept being part of that narrative. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then, I'll need to bring my tools and access to Valerian crystalline engineering databases. If I'm going to finish that mobility aid, I'll need proper materials and specifications. Thessaly's breath caught. You're coming? I'm terrified, he admitted. I'll probably fail at court politics. I'll definitely offend someone important with my ignorance of protocol. And I have no idea how to be a consort to a queen. But I've spent 8 years dying slowly because I was too afraid to risk living. And you crossed the void to give me a chance at something more. He took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that betrayed her nervousness despite her regal bearing. So yes, I'm coming with you. Not because I think I belong in your world, but because I'm willing to find out if I can. The smile that broke across her face was radiant, transforming her from queen to the woman he'd fallen for in 7 days. We leave immediately, she said. Brixton can help you pack whatever you need. There's not much. Just my tools and, he gestured toward the station. I should probably tell someone I'm abandoning this place. Already done, a familiar voice said. Naveen's face appeared on the observation lounge's communication screen, grinning widely. I contacted the Corps the minute you disconnected. They're sending a salvage team to properly decommission the station. Took about 30 seconds to approve, once I explained you'd been squatting there for 8 years. You, Orion stared at the screen. You didn't even know if I'd say yes. I knew you'd say yes, Naveen said confidently. You just needed time to admit it to yourself. Now go be a consort to a queen and stop wasting your life in the void. He paused. Also, I'm coming to the coronation. Try to stop me. The screen went dark. Thessaly laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I like your friend. He's insufferable, Orion said, but he was smiling too. As the crystal wind prepared for departure, Orion took one last look at the Meridian station through the viewport. 8 years of his life, reduced to a cluster of lights, soon to be dismantled and forgotten. But Thessaly's hand was warm in his, and ahead lay Velario's, beautiful, dangerous, and filled with impossible futures. No regrets? She asked softly. Orion thought about journal entries and technical drawings, about 7 days that had defined 8 years, about love that had survived absence and silence. Only that I didn't say yes sooner, he admitted. As the ship pulled away from the dying station, carrying him toward a world he didn't understand and a future he couldn't predict, Orion felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years. He felt alive.